Hello, I'm Casey Aiken, and this is 21 This Week. Coming up next, how valuable are endorsements by the Washington Post and the Montgomery County Gazette? And face off at center ice. Who won the Democratic governor's debate? Our panel of insiders will give you the story behind the story. We're joined by political consultant Rich Parsons, education activist Cynthia Rubenstein, Breitbart contributor Eric Cary, and the past president of the Montgomery County Republican Central Committee, Mark Uncapher. Stay tuned for these stories and more on the next 21 This Week. With primary elections scheduled in about a month, candidates are lining up for endorsements from support groups and from local media. This week, the Washington Post issued its endorsement for County Executive Isaiah Leggett for a third term as County Executive. Cynthia, the Post endorsement of Mr. Leggett was a qualified endorsement. It came with a big caveat. So how important is the Post endorsement? And since it was less than a ringing endorsement, how are voters going to treat it?
Well, first of all, it's very early, and I'm not sure how many voters are paying attention to the Washington Post editorials and endorsements. And secondly, printed media, I think, has less and less sway on, is getting fewer and fewer eyeballs. So I'm sure Ike Leggett is happy about it, but the Post also said very good things about Doug Duncan and Phil Andrews. So I think it's kind of a wash at this point.
Rich, what's your view of the Post endorsement?
Well, I think Cynthia actually hit it on the head. It's much less important than I think it used to be when print media was really the dominant source of information. Now there's so many places voters can go for information. It is early. I don't think most voters are paying attention yet. And their choice kind of mystified me a bit, as you know, Mr. Duncan's been on the same page with the Post on a lot of transportation issues over the years. Mr. Andrews has been on the same page with the Post on a lot of his fights with the employee unions, for example. The Post has backed Mr. Andrews. So it was kind of a curious choice, and it was filled with qualifications. So, I mean, as a consultant, what you hope for is a ringing endorsement with no caveats so you can put it in your direct mail. I don't know if Leggett can even do that with this one because there were so many qualifications.
Well, what struck me not only about the Post endorsement was the fact that the next day there was a major article about the debacle of the Silver Spring Transit Center. And it seemed curious the timing of the endorsement would be just before this critical article came out.
Right. I mean, it's also just very curious to me why, you know, when you look at polling data for where the voters really stand on issues, they really care about transportation issues as a huge priority, and there Mr. Duncan is just miles ahead of everyone else in that field, and yet they didn't go with him. So, you know, they must be looking at some other set of metrics than what their readers care about.
Okay, Mark, Cynthia said something about it being a little early. Well, there's only about a month left before the primary. So the Post, and we've talked about it, was harsh in its criticism of the Montgomery County and public employee unions in particular for having too much power. How do you see this election shaping up?
I think, well, this is a familiar position for the Post to be taking, but unfortunately the Post sort of raises the issue of the unions have too much say in Montgomery County, but they can't quite bring themselves to pull the reins back. They are just too conflicted to be able to make a change. It is a dominant issue. I think what people want is a county executive who can negotiate without having to feel that they're so completely beholden that they can't have an arm's length arrangement.
Eric, you contributed to new media outlets. So does the Post endorsement have any sway, or is old media dead and buried, as Cynthia was kind of suggesting? Does it have any power whatsoever?
I mean, looking at it from like a 100-watt light bulb perspective, it's halfway dim, you know, on a dimmer switch. And the reason why I say that is a lot of people, when they're online, they're looking at the different headlines that pop up in their readers and on all the different social medias where you'll see the headlines kind of show up. And that's where you kind of get some of the movement, in that people will see that and they might go and click on it, but the perspective of what we've seen in the past, no, it's just not there anymore.
Well, Cynthia, I want you, since you brought this up at the very beginning of the talk, what I find fascinating is that so few viewers really tune in to primary elections, and maybe that means that a an endorsement like from the Post is more important now than later on in November. What do you think?
I think people are not going to pay attention until much more starts to appear on TV. Many more of the ads start to appear on TV, and they haven't really started in earnest. I think that people don't pay attention till the last 2 weeks before the primary.
Casey's onto something, and June 24th is a date that we should be repeating every chance we get, just as a public information campaign, because that's the election that matters the most in this county, the primary election. A lot of voters still think just showing up in November is good enough, but in a lot of these races, everything's over by the primary, and the election that matters is in June, not November.
Mark, when does early voting start? I mean, it starts like 3 weeks
June
before.
10th. June, thank you.
June 10th, that's 3 weeks, almost 3 weeks before
It's coming
the
up.
primary. So it is coming up very fast.
And one of the things is the primary voters are the people who really pay attention. They're frankly the most likely to be, if they're not reading print media, they're at least reading it online.
Right.
So they're the ones who are following these issues the most closely and are probably the most influenced.
The other thing that also drives the whole primary is if any issues kind of pop up above the noise right before that, especially, and that's kind of the danger with the early voting. Sometimes issues pop up in that window of time and literally can change a lot of people, because I know I ran into it years ago during my campaign where people like, I wish I had a chance to go back.
Well, what I want to, and I want to ask the Democrats this question. Since this county is so heavily populated with Democrats, how does the internal workings of such a campaign, with your constituents and your regulars, how do they shake out when you have 3 fairly qualified candidates?
Well, you've really got to do a good job of targeting and honing your message and getting it to the people you think are going to come out and actually vote. And it can't just be the same old suspects, because the population ages, and the primary voting segment of the population particularly is aging. So there's always got to be efforts to expand that group and get more people to vote. But this county has had abysmal performance in that basic civic duty of turning out and voting in primaries.
Correct, and
we've got to start expanding.
Yeah, and I think that what's unfortunately, the gubernatorial race is very, very lackluster.
Well, we'll find that out.
And
Don't
Right.
So,
keep-
and I think that will drive, sorry,
Yeah, that usually
it's going to
drives
drive
something.
every other race behind it.
But there are
I'm
some
not-
big issues for the
So-
county, and it's actually really important who wins these elections. So
it's
everyone
huge
should
who
really
wins,
turn
who
out.
wins
Yeah,
these
that's
elections.
true, that's true.
What I worry about is the fact that so many new residents to Montgomery County do not register for a particular party. There's a lot of independents. They don't vote in this primary election, and they are effectively shut out when it comes to a say for who's going to give good governance here in Montgomery County. We got to go on to our next topic. Excuse me. Issuing endorsements in the General Assembly last week was the Montgomery County Gazette newspaper. They concentrated on the legislative districts. Mark, were you surprised that all of the endorsements by the Gazette were focused on Democratic candidates?
Well, I mean, the good news is we don't have a lot of Republican primaries in Montgomery County. We do have a primary at the state level. So what the Gazette frequently says, I know Eric knows a little bit, well, we're focusing on the primary and that's who it is. And what we then wait to see is whether they've completely forgot about the election come fall.
But which race in particular are you interested in the most?
Going into the fall?
Well, no, I was thinking about
in the primary, I think.
who's going to come out of the which primary election are you interested in?
I'm following the Republican gubernatorial primary. It's a very interesting 4-way race between in a very, very competitive. Nobody, I think, has really emerged as the favorite there yet.
Okay. Rich, what races in particular for the delegates are you focusing on, and for the Senate, and of course for the Senate seats?
Well, I'm real interested in District 15. That's one of the districts we have, I think, the strongest team in Annapolis right now. You've got Brian Feldman, Kathleen Dumais, you've got Aruna Miller, who's really emerged as a great legislator, and you've got David Frazier Hidalgo, who was recently appointed and doing a fantastic job by all accounts. I have real problems with I don't know what the Gazette's looking at in their endorsements. They endorsed 2 of the 3 House candidates, and they left Mr. Frazier Hidalgo off the ballot. I don't know why. David's doing a phenomenal job. He's one of the few people who's actually run a business, who's actually in elective office in the state legislature. He's Latino, one of the few in our delegation. He is a thoughtful, He's a leadership Montgomery graduate. He really is dedicated to the county. I would be surprised that he wasn't in the Gazette endorsement list, but he's certainly somebody worthy of support, and that's a race that I think it's important because that's one of the delegations in District 15 that's really producing good quality legislators to represent the whole people, the whole populace of the county.
And you forgot one very, very important fact. He was a former panelist of,
right.
of 21 this week.
Yeah.
We groomed him.
That's
we
right.
beat him into submission. Cynthia, what races are you looking at?
Well, I live in District 20, so I'm looking very closely at that because there are Heather Mazier is running for governor, and Tom Hucker is running for county council. So there's opportunity, and there are a bazillion candidates in that race. What I found about the Gazette's endorsements that was extremely puzzling, and I don't know what the heck they were smoking, is that they did not endorse Sheila Hickson, who is chair of the Appropriations Committee. She's been a very effective representative, not only for District 20, but for the entire Maryland delegation, and they did not endorse her. So
it's just crazy.
It's crazy. It's crazy. So I hold very little respect for the endorsements they did make because they left her out.
Okay. Eric, which races are you most interested in?
The one I'm actually really interested in is the gubernatorial race, both on the Democratic side and then also on the Republican side. The reason why I say that is right now we're at a pivotal point for the state of Maryland, and whoever wins on either side, on both sides of the election, has a chance of really setting the message in the direction of the state. Even for the person that comes in second place, still can help direct the message of where Maryland could go forward, just because they have the megaphone at that time. And that's where the candidates really truly need to understand is that's part of the responsibility of being the challenger, especially in a Democratic state such as Maryland. And that right there helps to kind of inform the people of what's going on.
Well, I thought there were some other interesting races. I think the race to replace Ginny Forehand was also one, and that was interesting. Cheryl Kagan received the endorsement. I thought that was an interesting pick by the Gazette. I like Cheryl; she's a fine candidate. So there are many races, and how it's going to shape up is very important for us here in Montgomery County, because the biggest complaint that we have in, year out, is that our delegation is ineffective. And we want to send effective people to Annapolis.
That is so true, and people don't really appreciate how much these state and local offices impact their daily lives, the way their businesses can operate and succeed. They have way more to do with our daily lives than government at the federal level, and it's really important, as you said, Casey, to get people who are good legislators who can be effective, like some of the ones we mentioned, Sheila, David, Cheryl, others. We've got some great people in this delegation, we've got some not so great, but the voters really need to turn out on June 24th and get involved, because this is what matters most to our community.
Well, look, every General Assembly of every state plays an important role. But think of how transportation impacts our lives. Think about how education impacts our lives. Think about how healthcare impacts our lives. These are all major pieces of legislation that the General Assembly deals with every year that they're in session. So it's important that we have, and as Rich indicated, don't forget primary day, June 24th. Be there and vote. When we come back from this short break, who won the Democratic governor's debate? Everybody wants to talk about it. We will in a couple seconds. Stay tuned. And welcome back. The first opportunity for the three Democratic candidates running for governor to debate one another took place this past Tuesday at the University of Maryland in College Park. Rich, even though none of the candidates who are running is the incumbent, the acknowledged frontrunner is the Lieutenant Governor, Anthony Brown. How important are the debates like this for the other two candidates, Attorney General Doug Gansler and State Delegate Heather Mazier?
Well, it's a good question. If you're the front runner, the key thing in these debates is not make any critical mistakes. For the other two, they've really got to break out of the box, and there's only a few opportunities like this where you have any kind of a large audience watching. And Gansler's challenge, I think, was to get forward these messages about the leadership he's shown on fighting domestic violence and other issues in his role as Attorney General, and how he's run an organization, and kind of make that case for competence and management, and take some shots at the front runner over the healthcare issue and some other things. For Heather Mazier, I think her challenge was really coming across as more than just kind of a also ran and trying to establish herself as a viable candidate who can compete with these other two, who are much better funded and generally seen as the two front-running candidates. So it's important because they don't get many shots at a big audience to try to define themselves, and that's what you saw each of them try to do.
Mark, wasn't it also important for the lieutenant governor to try to establish himself as a viable candidate in his own right? Many people, have said that they don't know really anything about Anthony Brown, other than he's been lieutenant governor, and thus far hasn't really established an identity for himself.
His strategy all along, I think Rich mentions not making a mistake. Well, that seems to be his strategy for the entire campaign, is to avoid getting out there and doing too much. And well, tactically that makes sense. I think it adds up over a period of time where people don't have a sense that he's the leader who can take the state forward, that he's sort of somebody who people don't feel comfortable or really have a clear idea of where he's going to go, what he's going to do.
Well, Eric, that was followed up by the Baltimore Sun, which had an interesting observation regarding the lieutenant governor's role on the failed Maryland Health Exchange. In its Thursday editorial, the Sun wrote, "But what exactly Mr. Brown had to do with the efforts to fix the website, just like what he had to do with the management of developing the website, is something of a mystery." So how vulnerable is the lieutenant governor to attack on his work as an office?
I mean, Lieutenant Governor Brown, he's so vulnerable. It's kind of like not wearing a coat at the South Pole and everybody else has got squirt guns. I mean, literally, he is in a very precarious position. And I mean, part of the problem is when you're a leader, you own it, and then you say, this is what I'm going to do to rectify and fix it. We really haven't heard any of that. And that from especially with his military background, that's where it's concerning for me as a leader.
So if he hasn't been demonstrating any noticeable leadership qualities, why is he the front runner?
Really?
Really. Cynthia, you voiced your support for Delegate Mazier on past occasions. And as the Baltimore Sun pointed out during this past debate, she admonished her rivals for bickering and not focusing on solutions to problems. Now, Mark and Rich both said she's got to establish herself as a candidate. Did she do a good job during this debate?
She did a good job for the opportunities that were provided by David Gregory, whom I thought did a horrible job of moderating. He seemed more keen on amping up the boxing match between Doug Gansler and Anthony Brown than he did allowing a forum for people to talk about policy and ideas. So Heather handled it very well, but she didn't get the distribution of airtime for her was not equitable from David Gregory.
I got to tell you, I thought David Gregory was a terrible choice.
He was awful.
He doesn't, I thought if you're great, he's high profile, but he doesn't know the state that right. where we're operating in. I thought it was just an insane choice for him to host and I agree with you. I thought he did it.
Yeah, I think Cynthia's right. He tried to feed those fires and really get the debate off substance and onto personal attacks, and that just didn't help voters make a rational decision. There's a lot of differences between these candidates. I thought a lot of the things that Heather raised about the millionaire's tax, she's really opened up a can of worms there and made a big mistake, because I think that was repealed for a very good reason and had no public support because it didn't work. So she made some mistakes too. But Gansler and Brown are going to fight over what you raised, Eric, about who's responsible for the debacle that is this health
I want to ask a question. How did Gansler do? We only have about a minute left. How did Gansler do in this? How does everybody think he did?
I think he raised the issues he needed to raise, and I think he he brought this dispute over the healthcare fiasco up to the fore. So I think he accomplished that objective. But I think he might have got caught up in a little bit of the bickering.
Close it out.
Well, I think that's the bickering. The beach weekend has been something that has just kind of hung over him for I guess almost a year now, and it's really been something that he's never been able to shake in any effective way.
Did he do that this past week?
I don't think so.
All right. As we go to break, if you'd like to learn more about the candidates, you can see my interview with Attorney General Doug Gansler and Delegate Heather Mazier on the Montgomery Community website or on YouTube. Got that? We're savvy here. Stay tuned for Parting Shots. Now with Parting Shots, Rich Parsons.
Well, last week I raised some concern about some sounds coming out of the county executives team sounding like they were going to come out against a key transportation project for the the Mid-County Highway, otherwise known as M83. This week, the county council seems to be falling apart and abandoning the approved county master plan for traffic relief, which is cause of great concern. I just want to, and maybe I'll take this as my parting shot every time for the next month until they change their mind. Look at the studies, folks. People are talking about transit options that don't exist, have been tried and tested through traffic modeling analysis and found not to work, and they're being held out as if those studies never happened. County Council needs to wake up, look at their own traffic modeling studies, and make rational decisions on transportation facilities like the Mid-County Highway, and they need to build it yesterday.
Thank you, Rich. Mark, Uncapher, your parting shot.
Maryland had some good news in the last week, and that is that the oyster population in the Chesapeake has reached the highest point that it's been since scientists began measuring it in 1985. It's gone up a lot in the last couple of years, but it's the highest that it has ever been. The oysters are important because they're a natural way of providing sort of a cleansing process to the bay. So let's hope this is a trend that can continue.
Thank you, Mark. Eric Cary, your parting shot.
In the last week or so, I've started to hear rumbles again about the distribution of proceeds from various sports associations, especially I live in Damascus. Our sports association has been very active and supportive of the school and the programs there. And part of what I'm starting to hear is start to spread the money or spread the wealth throughout the rest of the county. Well, let's start looking at the talent that's available throughout the rest of the county. If you want to spread the wealth that way, let's start spreading the talent. But until then, I applaud the parents of Damascus for supporting the kids, and let's get some of the other businesses to start doing the same throughout the rest of the region. And instead of spreading the wealth, how about we get the county to start looking at programs to figure out what they're doing in Damascus and show other schools and communities how to do the same instead of just basically taking the easy way out and giving participation trophies to everyone involved.
Thank you, Eric. Cynthia Rubenstein, your parting shot.
Okay, switching gears out of politics into education. Montgomery County Education Association invited many people to spend a day in an MCPS school, and I went to Broadacres Elementary School, which is the poorest elementary school in all of Montgomery County. It has a 94% free and reduced meals rate, and 2/3 of the students are English language learners. So I spent the morning with 18 fifth graders, and I was blown away at their potential. You know, eager learners, optimistic, positive kids who want to be actors and directors, engineers, veterinarians, and one girl who wants to be a doctor who specializes in asthma. So I am feeling so optimistic about our students, but what they need is more engagement of the broader community. So the next time MCEA has this opportunity, I'm going to broadcast it so that more people get to spend time with our students.
Well, thank you, Cynthia. And I want to thank the panel for being here. You know, today the temperature outside was about 80 degrees. The sun was shining most of the day. It was really nice to be out in pleasant weather for a change. We've had a really tough spring, and I'm so thankful that tonight the Wizards are playing, and then right after that, so are the Nationals. I've got my lineup all set. So I want to thank you for being here. Tune in each and every week to Montgomery County's hardest-hitting political talk show. And remember, you can like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and even watch us on YouTube. For 21 This Week, I'm Casey Aiken.